the meeting to order, and we will begin with the introduction of guests. And I'm going to ask that you give your name and also your role.
Carrie Gray, Director of Finance. Stephanie Stevens, Director of Federal Programs and Communications.
Scott Elias, working with Huntsville County.
Audrey Palomino with Jack.
You just wind around.
Dave Kenyon, Office of State Auditor, Director of Policy.
Good afternoon, Joseph Elias, New Mexico State Auditor.
Sean Beckman, Special Investigations Director for the Office of the State Auditor.
Trey Williams, Lupton High School Principal.
Roger Hine, Director of Special Programs.
Kurt Buren, Athletic Director.
Carrie Parker, Assistant Superintendent. Ruth Campbell, Lovington Leader.
Della Cruz, Director of Operations.
Michael Rutledge, Technology Director.
Okay, welcome everyone. All right, first item on the agenda, adopt the agenda with flexibility. Are there any adjustments to tonight's agenda? Okay, do I hear a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
Second.
All right. We're going to move right on in. And for those of you that weren't here last month, we're actually operating on a new software system, so it gets a little interesting for some of us up here. All right, we're going to move right into the administrative reports, and I will open it up to board members for any questions. Okay, no questions? And I'll turn it over to the superintendent. Is there any additional information that you would need to share with your report?
Just that we finished up the school year and graduated a bunch of Wildcats, and so excited about that. And it took a whole village to get them across the stage and to host it at Wildcat Stadium. I couldn't have done it without my directors for sure, and the high school principal orchestrating it all, and community members like the fire department and the sheriff's office. So very appreciative of that. We've had some kids go to nationals, and they have represented us very well with behavior and academics and all the things, doing it the Wildcat way. So, and just getting our next couple of weeks of vacation to start again.
Starts right back up.
Yes.
Yes, and certainly congratulations, Mr. Williams, on another graduation, getting those kids across, but I know it's a lot of moving parts, so thank you. Wind or no wind, we figure out a way. So absolutely, you guys did a great job and made it easy for us, so thank you very much. Anything else from the superintendent?
No, ma'am.
Okay, let's move right on into routine matters. We'll take items 1 through 4 as part of the consent agenda. Do I hear a motion to approve as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, any questions on any of those items? All right, motion and a second.
Could you sleep?
She said it's open.
Oh. I don't have her open yet, but that's
It's not. Did yours pop up? No? Apparently it is. Do you want to just do a roll call? Is it?
So they all voted yes?
We all voted yes? Okay. There we go. Gotta love new technology. All right, so it shows up as we all voted yes?
I never showed it.
Yes. Okay. Next item on the agenda, budget adjustments. I'll turn it over to the superintendent and the CFO.
Members of the board, we have for this board meeting 3 bars, budget adjustment requests. One is for Fund 24115, which is for our private schools. Oh, thank you. For our private schools, so that's the initial bar for that. The reason you see the offsetting decrease for 24106 was it was all part of the same unified application. So we're just moving that. And then an increased bar per carryover award for Fund 24189.
Okay, Thank you. Thank you, Carrie. Questions from the board? Do I hear a motion to approve the bars as presented?
So moved.
Okay. Oh, okay, I see what I gotta do. Okay. It's that little blue box that says show voting. Okay. This is all new to us. Okay. All right. Is it complete? Okay. Moving on to the next item, donations.
President Maker, I would just like to thank Lovington, the city of Lovington. They're just very giving. And then we also have HF Sinclair Navajo Refinery, who does huge donations to our robotics program. And you will see there the amount, very generous. And so we're very much appreciative of what our community does for us.
Absolutely. All right, thank you. Do I hear a motion to approve the donations as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. I guess. I'm gonna leave mine. Oh, there it is. I'm gonna leave it. Okay. Did you get your vote, Patty Ann? Okay. Okay. We'll move into old business. First item is second reading to consider policy advisories 273 and 274.
Yes, ma'am. This is the second reading, and advisory 273 is addressing that we might require an employee to complete a medical exam, and advisory 274 is just some changes to misleading language, potential misleading language for the IRPA.
Okay, do I hear a motion to approve policy advisories 273 and 274 as presented?
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
It is open. All right. Okay.
Ms. Ansel, are you a yay? Thank you.
All right, next item. Second reading. I'm really hating this new system. I'm trying to. Second reading to consider policy revisions to section G.
Yes, ma'am. So we are working through section G to make sure it aligns with our new 4-day calendar and that the language there within.
So nothing has changed from what you presented at last month?
No, ma'am.
Okay,
No,
all
ma'am.
right. Any questions from the board? All right, do I hear a motion to approve as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. We will now move into new business. First item is consider approval of the findings from the special audit.
Madam President, members of the board, as you are aware, and I believe it was about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, we began the journey and process of a special audit. I kind of stepped right in the middle of it, so I do appreciate JAG being so helpful with catching me up. Sean Beck from the state auditors, Tony Ortiz, our legal counsel. So through that, what you have is the report that has been written by JAG. It has been approved by the state auditor. I believe they both have some notes and comments, so we're blessed to have the state auditor, Mr. Joseph Maestas, and he will give some comments. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman, members of the board. It's an honor to be here with you this afternoon. My name is Joseph Maestas. I'm the state auditor. Before I get into my remarks, I just want to remind everyone that it's actually a requirement that I attend these public presentations of the state audits when I'm invited. And there's an old antiquated requirement that requires the state auditor to visit all 33 counties. So I think we did some damage today. So I want to recognize some of my staff that are here that were integral to this whole effort. Behind me is Sean Beck. He's our Special Investigations Division Director. He handles all the anonymous intake of fraud, waste, and abuse complaints, and he is the office liaison for special audits such as these. I call him Sheriff because he's all business. He's a serious guy. And then we also have David Pena. He is my Policy Director and PIO. David is very experienced in legislative affairs and dealing with the media. So with that, Madam Chair, my remarks are going to be very brief. And then Ms. Jaramillo will follow with a more detailed presentation of the special audit. So if I may, and to anyone that's online, hello, I know your legal counsel, Tony, very well. He should be here in person, so you might want to dock him on that. Anyway, we're here to talk about something fundamental to every family in Lovington. How our school's public money is managed and how public trust is protected. And I know I've been an elected official for over 20 years now, and I also served my country for over 30 years in federal civil service. And I took the oath of office, but in that oath, there's no mention of upholding the public's trust or assuming fiduciary responsibilities for taxpayer money. But guess what? When you all took that oath, it's embedded in there. It's silent, but it's very prominent. And so that's what this is really all about. It's trying to uphold and preserve the public's trust and fulfill your fiduciary responsibilities. So the Office of the State Auditor has a responsibility to look closely and act appropriately when concerns are raised about the misuse of public funds. In this case, we received allegations involving procurement contracting and a long-standing vendor relationship within the Lovington Municipal School District that led me to designate the district for a special audit. What is a special audit? It's a process designed to investigate allegations, review documentation and processes, and establish facts. This process seeks to determine whether systems intended to safeguard public money worked as they should have. This review looked at several years of activity, specifically from 2017 until the end of 2024. What did it focus on? It focused on procurement and contracting practices, oversight of long-term technology vendor, documentation and internal controls, and how decisions were made, approved, and recorded. This work was conducted by an independent forensic professionals using established auditing standards and state law. What did the audit find? The audit found significant and sustained weaknesses in oversight, documentation, and internal controls. These were not isolated issues, but were systemic. Specifically, the audit identified breakdowns in procurement practices and vendor oversight, incomplete or missing documentation supporting spending decisions, limited independent verification of work performed and cost billed, weak contract management and fragmented records, and insufficient board visibility into recurring expenditures. The audit does show that over time, a vendor relationship became deeply embedded in daily operations without a consistent reassessment of cost, competitiveness, or structure. When that happens, risk increases to the school district and to the appropriate use of public funds. Some of the findings were the report identified approximately $949,000 in questioned or insufficiently supported costs associated with labor and travel expenses, more than $500,000 in travel-related expenses lacking adequate documentation, almost $300,000 in labor charges lacking sufficient supporting documentation, more than $150,000 in differences between vendor-reported amounts paid and district invoice records, and more than $140,000 in labor discrepancies attributable to differences between invoiced labor hours and supporting documentation. The audit also found gaps in tax compliance. These are all indicators of weak systems that elevates the risk to public resources. The findings of this audit are important because public education depends on trust. Parents trust that resources are going to classrooms, just as taxpayers trust that spending is accountable, and employees trust that systems are fair and consistent. This trust is maintained through controls, transparency, and oversight. So what happens next? When an audit identifies breakdowns like this, the governing body must take action to correct the problems to restore public trust. I commend the district for taking swift initial action in December 2024 to cease all operations with the vendor in question. And since then, you have all continued to implement a significant number of corrective actions to address compliance deficiencies, including strengthening oversight, improving documentation, and reassessing procurement practices. That corrective work must continue to ensure ongoing accountability every day and every financial quarter. So at the end of the day, this is about something very simple. Public money must be handled with care, and the systems that protect it must work consistently, transparently, and without exception. My office will continue to monitor this process closely and will expect full cooperation, transparency, and follow-through. The students, families, and taxpayers of Lovington deserve nothing less. Thank you. And I'd like to have Audrey Jaramillo come up, and if it's okay with you, Madam Chair, to begin a more detailed presentation of the audit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a very good executive summary there already. I will not be going through the whole entire report page by page, thank God. We'd be here all night. And you'll see a lot of sections, have a lot of detailed information, and then some summary areas as well. Thank you for having it up on the screen for whoever is joining us online. And I know each of you has a printed version, so let's just start with the table of contents and we'll get familiar with the structure of the report here. And so first off, we have an executive summary, and then we go over the engagement objectives and scope of the engagement. This was agreed to by the district and the state auditor's office, and then we were contracted and then performed the procedures, obviously. And there's details on those procedures following. We make reference to the findings in this front part of the report and give some definitions of what is fraud, what is waste, what is abuse, those types of things. When dealing with taxpayer funds, like the auditor mentioned, it's just so important to have those strong controls and compliance over that. And I have sat where you all are for 8 years, and I know how much the boards rely on administration. And it is a lot of trust, but also verifying as well. And you'll see later in the report one of the findings about the audit and finance committees. And I think that the legislature years ago recognized that there were additional checks and balances needed. And it's not that any administration is really going to intentionally do anything incorrectly, but just having those checks and balances between all of the branches of government or the parts of the government and the operation is really helpful. So as you all go through corrective action, I would just encourage you to really lean on the committees as well, because they have a statutory duty. And then as board members, you all should feel free to ask for whatever you would like to look at, and just keep your eyes open. And then, you know, maybe something like this wouldn't have slipped past for so many years. We do dive into the detailed areas of risk and testing, and those follow the scope of work exactly. And then we have a conclusion part, and then corrective actions that the district has taken already. Then we have our exit conference page and our exhibits. So the exhibits are the schedule of findings and responses, the district org charts, just for reference for any of the users in the public or anyone wanting to see how things are structured within the district. We have our detailed testing of the district vendor payments, and then just reference manuals, one from PED's PSAB, and the other, that's the district's business manual. So if you all are in the future ever wondering how is finance supposed to do this or that, you can always refer to the successor too. It is online on the state auditor's website, and I'm not positive if the district has put it on their website, but of course it's available through IPRA or on the state auditor's website. This engagement, I'm starting on page 2. If we could scroll to page 2. We just do point out the standards that we performed the engagement under here, and the standards for forensic services established by the AICPA, which is the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. I won't go too far into the executive summary since the auditor did a great job with that already. Again, the period on page 3 is covering July 1, 2017 through December 31st, 2024. We'll go to page 5, and there's a bullet point list that's also in the findings that we'll look at, but that does identify some of the bigger picture discrepancies and differences between what was charged to the district and what we saw. On page 7, we have a chart that shows some of the timeline of actions, and I know it probably feels like this has been going on forever. It might be an understatement, but these things, while they do take time, are very healthy, I think, to actually open up the wound, so to speak, dispel any rumors, get the truth. And really with JAG, that is our goal, is to provide truth and answers to government leaders and stakeholders, and just try to shed light on things that may be in question and say, okay, what really did happen? We started our field work, I believe, in May to August of last year. And then while all of the districts and agencies across the state were working on their external auditors, the vendor was pulling information, and that continued into the winter. The district had a little bit remaining, but it was mainly the vendor that we wanted to give every opportunity to provide as many documents as possible. And so that wrapped up roughly sometime in March, and then we would provided the initial findings to the district in March, and then the district scheduled these meetings in May and June respectively. So it feels probably like a long time, but we are through it and at the end of the process here. And now you all have a roadmap for, you know, making any corrections. I just want to say we're happy to answer any questions anytime. So Superintendent, if something comes up, or Carrie, if you need anything at all, feel free to reach out to us in the future as you go through this. And I know the audit committee will be very involved in monitoring the corrective actions and reporting back to the board the progress of the board, as is their statutory duty. You can see on page 9 some of the scope of work. On the page before, we don't need to go there, but we just had to identify and analyze the processes and procedures, both official and unofficial, of working with the vendor. And then on page 9, you can see in the scope of work, we looked at vendor procurement, purchase orders, invoicing, signatures, the goods and services provided or performed, and try to correlate all of those. We looked at vendor licensing and insurance, the relationship, which was longstanding, and then anything other that came up to our attention as far as documentation and risks. Pages 10 through 12 just go over some of our forensic procedures that we performed. I believe we have it in here, but I did want to add, we also looked through some IT emails to kind of determine the relationship, again, between district staff and the vendor, and didn't see anything inappropriate there. And so for the findings, those are in Exhibit 1. And let's jump to page 13 under definitions. And so there's definition of fraud there, and we did not note any fraud per se or misappropriation of assets. However, we did see items that could have been determined to be wasteful and services that provided that we could not prove out through the documentation that was available. So with waste, just it's important to remember that wasteful spending of taxpayer dollars doesn't have to be, fraud per se, and it doesn't have to be abuse of funds or abuse of position by somebody, but it can relate to mismanagement or inadequate oversight, and I think that may be partially what occurred here. And it did seem a little fragmented is the word that the auditor used, and I think that is true with the documentation. Finance did a great job of having the purchase orders and the invoices. IT had some of the information, but not all. Not all of the receiving information was retained. And so that could have led to some of it. Also, the statements of work, the IT had with the vendor, and there were communications through email. Anyway, it was a little fragmented, right? It was in different places. So it did take a little while, and the vendor did work very cooperatively to provide what they did have. And so there were many parts and pieces to the puzzle to put all of this together. But back to the definitions, waste and abuse are also areas to look out for, not just fraud. And the district will have to do, make their own determination on that. We don't make conclusions on the guilt or innocence of any party, of course, but with some of the overcharges that it appeared to us, your attorney can advise you on how to address those overcharges and items without supporting documentation. So, okay, now we'll jump past the definitions and we will go to page 17, please. And here we have a chart that lists what we saw from the purchase orders, statements of work, and invoice activity for these IT functions for the district through this vendor. The district paid the vendor a total of $6.1 million. 1.5 million, or 25%, was labor related. There were travel costs of 8.3%, or 510,000. 963,000, or 15.7%, in support and other services. And then also goods were purchased through this vendor as well for approximately 2.2 million in supplies and materials. And then software licenses also. And I think everyone knows, but I'll just say it for those who may not know that this vendor was procured through a cooperative purchasing agreement through Texas. We did do the work on that and determined that it is not illegal to do that by any means. It's acceptable to do that. It's just that it was never coming to the board for approval except on E-rate. And due to the long-standing nature of it, we felt like for fair and open competition, that periodically it would be a good idea for any government really to kind of check and see, especially with these numbers of travel expenses. I know the vendor is coming from El Paso, and so they were charging, I think, 5 hours for travel, even though sometimes it's only 4 hours. And, you know, things like that, direct travel costs as well, not just labor, to where if you had a local vendor that did have the expertise, hey, at least give them the opportunity to bid. It doesn't mean you have to choose them, but it means that you would at least see what's in the marketplace for open and fair competition. So while this didn't directly violate the procurement code from a technical sense, perhaps in, you know, in a way, you know, the procurement code is all about best obtainable price and fair and open competition. And so to get that best obtainable price, how do you know for sure? But the procurement that was used was a legal procurement vehicle, I guess you could call it, or a method. So I did want to add that too. Any questions on that part of it as far as the procurement goes? Okay. We go into a lot of detail on that in here, but I will skip past that. The district did not have, if you go to page 23, and we do note that there was not an overarching contract with the vendor. So while there were individual, I think of them as task orders, maybe, you know, like with an engineer or, you know, like task orders for things that were reviewed and approved on the district side. There weren't final signed copies always by the vendors on their side. And there wasn't an overarching contract with the district that would kind of protect the district's interests, go through legal sufficiency review and things like that. So that was one thing that we definitely recommend to ensure. And remember that your finance committee by state statute is supposed to have oversight and accountability and oversight over procurement as well. So it's not just the board, it's also the finance committee by statute. And the CPO, of course. On page 25 is the section that starts the discussion on the historical procurement and contracting practices. And I think, you know, this was the sense that we got from our interviews is that the working relationship with the vendor was very good. And over time, the vendor did know the district's operations and did know the district's infrastructure. And it seemed to be a cohesive, effective, and efficient relationship. Again, we did see that there were discounts that were not applied that should have been, travel costs, the limited competitive reassessment that I mentioned, and then other concerns with the number of hours charged that we weren't able to prove out that are shown in the report as well. I believe that that is why the relationship was so long-standing, is because of their history with the district. And of course, there's nothing wrong with having vendors supplement your operations. There's nothing wrong with that at all. It's just that there could have been stronger controls over checking the charges, the invoices, and then bringing the procurement to the board as required. There was some concern that purchase orders were just kind of being used up, and then a new one would be opened. And so that would be something to keep an eye on for the future. Okay, we'll skip to page 38. And this just shows the amount of labor and the estimated GRT rate and the amount of penalty and interest and gross receipts tax that may have not been collected on the goods and services provided to the district. And we do agree, of course, that's the vendor's responsibility. When invoices are reviewed, though, just for state compliance reasons, it's something that can be on the radar of AP in the future as they're looking at invoices, and then they could follow up with a question like, hey, I noticed that, you know, GRT wasn't charged. So I would guess that this may be something that's referred to tax and rev. On page 42, we know that the district finance files lacked the receiving reports or packing slips and delivery verification records, reconciliation, documentation, infrastructure maps, or other supporting materials to independently verify that goods billed to the district have been received. We tried to do our best to verify that what was being billed to the district was actually here. And that was very, very difficult because without the engineering, the district did pay for engineering, but we didn't have maps of exactly where everything had been installed. So the statement of work would give a general area, but it wasn't like we could go into the walls and ceilings and, you know, find exactly what had been installed when and where and by who, right? So it was very hard to prove out. We also did as much diligence as we could in proving out the software licenses, but sometimes, you know, the scope of work went back to 17. So sometimes licenses have been replaced and the district didn't have a good centralized location of all those agreements. And there is an accounting standard, GASB 96 on what's called SBITAs, the subscription-based IT arrangements. And so those all have to be tracked very carefully and listed out in their terms and all of their, you know. So the district has some improvements to make there, as well as with tagging, which I believe had already started by the time of our field work. The district had been making improvements on tagging assets. And as far as the infrastructure, I would just say that if you are using a vendor of this nature, that ensuring that the district personnel know exactly as well what is put in where, and then have good records of that with the I guess you could call them network or infrastructure mapping, so that you know exactly that something was put in 2020. And, you know, it's only going to last this long, and that way they can project and look at, okay, when is this going to need to be replaced again? Things like that. And also for your capital assets, because your capital assets records may not actually be complete, because we didn't see that all of this infrastructure that you were creating was put into your capital assets and depreciated over time, which is an accounting requirement under GASB 34. So. Oh, and then I just wanted to add on the receiving reports and speaking to IT. I think that they normally, when they received a box of items, they would, you know, get it, check it off, but that wasn't always retained. And so for a good audit trail and for finance to know, hey, we can go ahead and pay this, it's good to have the proof of the receiving aspect of it. Because I know everyone trusts each other, but at the same time, it's good to, you know, make sure that some iPads didn't walk off or something, right? And those tags need to be there and everything, so. Okay. We did verify what the former finance director had stated is the vendor did not have all of the requirements that they needed or copies here at the district anyway as far as insurance. And there wasn't a licensing requirement as far as an engineer because IT engineering is different than an actual engineer. So that wasn't required. But they also hadn't registered with DWS until all of this came up. So we weren't really sure as far as, well, let me put it this way. District wasn't sure. We verified that they weren't registered and that wage decisions weren't occurring through DWS during that time until the issue was brought up, until that issue was questioned. We did also find during the course of our procedures that the background checks for the vendors' staffing that were on site in schools were not performed. And so that is an area of improvement as well, that the district should make sure that any vendor that's working on site with in proximity to children, of course, have their background checks. And on page 52, we did not identify any direct financial ownership interests, familial relationships, or anything like that prohibited under district policy or the Governmental Conduct Act or nepotism arrangements or anything like that. But there were concerns of the risk of, kickbacks or anything of that nature. And so that is where we went ahead and sent a confirmation to the vendor, and you can see what they checked off here in their response, that the vendor stated that they and their employees, contractors, or representatives did not subcontract or pay amounts, discounts, provide perks, training, travel, donations in kind, or any other benefits to any district employee, their family members, or related businesses to a district employee. And then they did not receive anything back from any district employee, their family members, and or related businesses. Some of you may be aware there's a special audit in northern New Mexico that did have issues with this. So it does happen, and it is something to definitely look out for. But our engagement did not identify evidence to establish the existence of something like that happening. I know that there were concerns about the district staff possibly, Facebook friends or traveling or their families being friends or things like that. So just always be aware of the appearance of any conflicts of interest, I suppose. Making sure that you have all of your Governmental Conduct Act internal controls checked, and that procurement is checking before they award contracts to those listed Governmental Conduct Act forms that HR collects, and connecting those dots between procurement, issuing contracts, and then what you all collect as far as GCA compliance, and making sure, because it could happen with, anyone. Not to pick on the principal's, family member could have a business and the principal's ordering something, and, so it sometimes does happen where procurement does need to check for those types of relationships. Okay, I think we will jump back to corrective actions on page 63. In this section, these were things that we were aware of that the district had already begun to correct. They were following up with the vendor, implementing additional requirements. They stopped work with the vendor when all of this came about. They took a look at the Omnia purchasing arrangements and began reassessing things. So that continues on to page 64. Other items that they did is consulted legal counsel, just increased school board awareness, and began looking at policies and procedures, etc. On page 67, we have a summary of the findings. And we'll just start going through them. The first finding is on page 68. And this one just discusses the long-term procurement practices, limiting the competitive market evaluation, and created possible waste of public funds, since the goods and services could have been obtained at a better obtainable price, possibly. And there was a lot of reliance on the vendor, which again is not illegal or wrong per se. It's just that there needs to be additional checks and balances on those decisions. And the district does not maintain a central log of contracts and procurements to ensure that terms and conditions are met and that everything is going to the finance committee and the board as it should, although I think they have started doing that since the scope of work. On page 72, we have our second finding, and this is issues in connection with the expenditures paid to the vendor. And so there's a chart here that has the breakout. We did note some unsupported travel expenses and invoiced hours that were not adequately supported by the weekly status reports, the time reports. That was a pretty big undertaking, is comparing the number of hours between all of the invoices and the SOWs, and then these WSRs, the weekly status reports. It was a lot to go through, and we had a lot of follow-up with the vendor on that. But at the end of the day, we could not prove out 141,000 of those hours, and that's in Exhibit 2. And then we did see estimated discounts of approximately $85,000 that were required, but we didn't see the discount being taken by the vendor on the invoices. The missing receiving reports and packing lists were the total of approximately $2.2 million. Of course, it doesn't mean you didn't receive it. It just means that we didn't have the documents to prove that you had received it. There were, like I mentioned earlier, some unexecuted statements of work. POs were pretty general in nature and didn't always have a lot of detail. And then the overarching executed contract needing to be there. And then project acceptance forms were not completed. So when a project is completed, it's a good idea to go through, check everything off, sign off, make sure everything is on record, tagged, all of that. We mentioned the cabling maps on page 74. The cabling maps and other infrastructure details, sign-offs, project management. There were some after the fact purchase orders, and after the fact POs means they were issued subsequent to the commitment for goods or services. And then we're unable to trace IT capital asset purchases into the additions or capitalization in the capital assets listing, not including items under 5,000, which totaled to about 3.2 million. So again, something for the audit for this year is to ensure that your capital assets has all of the infrastructure in it, and that those assets are being depreciated. Okay, page 78. Our third finding is on the board meeting minutes and quarterly financial information not posted on the district website. And I know the district has gone through some changes in the platform, right? And so that is something that I think contributed to that. But state statute does require these items here to be on the website for transparency purposes and for the public. On page 81, procurement methods and vendor contracts not presented for Board of Education approval. And actually it would be to the Finance Committee as well. but that is something just the CPO needs to ensure that things are coming to the board. By state statute, the board does need to approve contracts. Most districts, and I can't recall yours offhand right now, but they do delegate a certain threshold of dollar amount of contracts. And Madam Chair, do you know the dollar amount?
60,000.
60 for here? Okay. So the superintendent is delegated the executive power by the board to go ahead and sign off on those contracts over 60. That is something that you can consider if you want to keep it that way. You can change it. You can say, just give us a report of what you signed off. It is completely up to you. But you all, the executive power comes from the board that you delegate to the superintendent. And so you can make policy changes at any time in relation to procurement, thresholds, what you want to see, what you don't want to see, those kinds of things. So just being an extra check and balance. And it's not always that anyone has intentions of doing something. It's just good, always good to have the third set of eyes for sure. On page 83, we do have some recommendations for IT and backup, restore testing. You hear about this all the time, but with ransomware, this is a very high risk area, and so we just encourage all of our clients that test your backups. I can't tell you how many times IT, when we go and they will say, oh yeah, we have our backups, but then when ransomware does happen, weeks, months, that they can't access their information, and it really disrupts the operations of the entity. There are other environmental things, fire suppression systems, alarms, generators, environmental monitoring, and things like that that need to be improved, and some obviously budget could be allocated there. A strategic plan would be great as far as replacement and other strategic items the district wants to do. Tracking the software licenses, the maps, and there were some crossovers between IT functions and maintenance that weren't entirely clear to us, but that might just be something to look at with job descriptions and strategic planning. And the IT director used to have a low voltage license. It's not required by his job description, but this is just a recommendation. We thought it would be good to have somebody who is aware of that area, checking a vendor and what they're doing and signing off on what they did was correct. Tagging of the assets, of course, and then your asset listing. And I can get this information to Carrie if you remind me, but there are a lot of fields that the MMAC require. I mean, everything from condition to the asset, the funding source of the asset, if it was federal or state, many fields that are required in your asset listing. And then we didn't see disposal of capital assets in the minutes. So that was finding 5. On page 87, we have vendor registration, which I already talked about. And the district didn't have documentation demonstrating the vendor's compliance with the New Mexico prevailing wage requirements. If it applied, it may not have applied to everything this vendor was doing, but certainly construction and installation of things. On page 89, the GRT not assessed for services. And page 91, vendor certificates of insurance not maintained. That's an easy fix, right? And page 93, internal audit function not established. So this one is a recommendation, and it's, I think, outside the box for New Mexico, and to where I think it's APS, and I'm not sure how many other districts, probably not many, have an internal auditor. But with that being said, I don't think that should hold you back from having an internal auditor. They normally pay for themselves. They identify many risk areas and many areas of fraud, waste, and abuse. And so if you all had a successful internal auditor, you could contract or have an employee. The higher education entities do have internal auditors, and it is very, very helpful. It's just that K-12, for some reason, just has not typically had one. But we do recommend it. And they are great for putting aside, any rumors, anything that comes up through a hotline, through a risk assessment, through a report, just concerns the superintendent may have or the board may have, hearing from the public. They can do targeted little mini audits really throughout the year and then report directly to the board, but of course administratively to the superintendent and in conjunction with the audit committee so that things can be addressed timely. And that way things come to your attention quicker and are resolved more timely. And when you do have an internal auditor, they are the number 2 way that fraud is discovered. And so if there is fraud, it's really, really helpful to have an internal auditor because they have a much higher chance of catching it than an external auditor that only catches things about 4% of the time with a regular audit. On page 96, this relates to the IRS forms, the W-9 forms, and for this, we have the district did obtain, did issue the Form 1099 for the fiscal year 2024. But the vendor did not need a 1099, and so there seemed to be a lack of controls over having those W-9s on file. And on the W-9, it'll say if it's a corporation, and they can see if a 1099 needs to be issued or not. So that was the piece of the puzzle that was missing in the district's records there. A pretty simple compliance fix. Page 99 is the Finance and Audit Committee monitoring and oversight. And the district has had these committees. We noted it didn't always have the required numbers, but also they are intended to be very strong monitoring and oversight forces for the district. And they do sign non-disclosure agreements to protect confidential information. And so we're just recommending, and you can see on page 100, that the statutes have a lot of requirements for these committees. So we're just encouraging that the district, have an audit committee charter and strengthen the checks and balances and oversight through these 2 committees, like the legislature intended. On page 103, formal risk assessment, identification, monitoring, and corrective actions. This is a common area of recommendation that the district periodically sit down and take a look at internal controls, take a look at different risks. If you had an internal auditor, they would be doing this with you. If you don't, it's something that the district would have to pick up maybe during strategic planning. But monitoring and oversight are requirements. We do refer on page 104 to COSO and the integrated framework, which is in another words called Green Book. And risk assessment is a very key part of your internal control cycle. On page 107, we're recommending the fraud, non-compliance, waste, and abuse anonymous reporting tools or a tip hotline. You can use the state auditors on their website, but tips are the number 1 way that fraud, waste, and abuse are identified. And page 109, internal controls over compliance with the Governmental Conduct Act. And that's what I had mentioned earlier, just making sure that those disclosure forms are checked during procurement And Governmental Conduct Act is a lot more than just moonlighting, as far as employees have to disclose in writing, you know, their outside employment. It also covers things like honoraria for speaking engagements. It covers political activities that are prohibited, things like that. So it's a good one to really review and be familiar with. And page 112, we're recommending that the employee handbook and training should be strengthened to address ethical conduct and conflict of interest expectations. And this is just a best practice or a recommendation, but I did want to add that our state audit act and audit rule require us to put even recommendations as findings. So if there's something that we do see while we're performing work, we do have to add it in as a finding. And usually they're classified as other matters. And then 115, for this, we are recommending that anyone who is allowing their signature to be used on checks or other documents that they review, what they're allowing their signature to be used on, and give their blessing for their signature to be used, right? Because otherwise, what is the point of an internal control of a check if it's just printed out? Anybody, not anyone, but people could print them and then you're not the one actually signing them. I mean, I do know governmental entities that the board members who are the signatories, usually there's at least one, but they will come in and sit down and review every single voucher packet and sign the check. Well, that may not be realistic, right? But at least, at a very minimum, I would think that finance could provide a check run with the details, and then if there were any questions by that person who's signing, they could follow up with questions. And really, it's just to prevent any auto pen type of things. I mean, checks are legal tenders. They're a legal instrument. And it should really be informed consent as to what they're signing. So, okay, page 118 is, I believe, our last finding, and vendor employee background checks on-site work at school facilities. And so this is definitely an area of risk that we happen to notice for not having those background checks performed for the vendors since they were on campuses. Okay, so that is the findings. And then I just want to point out the long schedule that starts on page 124. And it's the landscape version. And this just has all of the details of voucher numbers and the dates paid for all of these different fiscal years for the vendor. And so if you're curious about any of that, that's what the invoice totals up to on page 130, 6.1 million, roughly. And then there's the two reference guides in the back, and that's the end of the report. So I'll be happy to answer any questions for you, any comments. Scott, can you think of any other comments we need to add here? Anything on your mind?
Just that this report's on the CR's website, it's a good read, so take it home, read it tonight.
Fall asleep? No. Superintendent, anything any comments?
Very thorough.
Okay.
Questions from the board?
I do want to thank the team for their patience and everyone's cooperation and patience while we collected everything from the vendor and made it through the testing. So, been great to work with. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey. Before I take a motion to approve this, I will read a statement on behalf of the board. The Lovington Municipal Schools Board of Education takes their job of ensuring the appropriate use of public funds to support the education of all students very seriously. It should be noted that the district self-reported this issue, and upon that action, the superintendent immediately ordered all work with this vendor to be ceased pending the completion of this investigation, as well as notifying the board. This process has been a long and sometimes uncomfortable one. However, we are appreciative of the feedback and support that has been given to the district regarding this matter. Moving forward, we have already begun implementing several of the recommendations and will continue to assess, monitor, and adjust, if necessary, all components of our procedures in order to continue to utilize all dollars for the school district in the most efficient and effective manner. And so with that, do I hear a motion to approve the findings of the special audit?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. We will move forward with the meeting, and you all are welcome to stay, or if you need to hit the road to Roswell, whatever works for you all. So, again, thank you. All right, we're going to move right on in to the next item. Consider approval for the open meetings notice. I'll turn it over to the superintendent.
This is an annual thing we do, and so just want to keep it on Mondays at 5 o'clock, if that's okay with you guys, the second Monday of the month.
Okay. Any comments from the board? All right, hearing none, do I hear a motion to approve the Open Meetings Act notice as presented?
So moved. Second.
All right, next item. Consider approval for removal of stale dated checks over 1 year.
Madam President, members of the board, every year we are required to look at any checks that were over a year old. So what you're seeing are any checks that are dated prior to June 30th of 2025. And we have reached out to some of those. I will reach out one more time. As you see, there was only one that was over $400, and that one we actually believe the vendor was bought by another company, so it was probably the rest you can think of like $40, $50. So I'm just asking your approval to remove those from our GL and get those off our books.
All right, thank you, Carrie. Questions from the board? Hearing none, do I hear a motion to approve the stale dated checks as presented?
So moved.
Is it working?
She's in a different view or something. I don't know how.
Okay. And I'd say any of those that you just need to verbal with Vanessa, that's fine. Okay. Thank you, Patty Ann. All right. Next item, consider approval of Honeywell Service Agreement Addendum.
Yes, ma'am. So you guys have that in your, well, not packet, but on your computer screens. And I'll stand for any questions. Mr. Van Hoosier is not here tonight, but it's just to extend the contract through June of 2027.
All right, questions from the board? I'm answering our attorney, just so y'all know.
No.
Are we deducting the fire alarm test and stuff with that?
Because Honeywell we need to go with a different company. That's not something in their purview that they can do. That's correct. So we just need to update what we've been doing.
You have a new company?
We are looking into it, yes.
It said they were looking into a new company for. Okay, any other questions? Okay, do I hear a motion to approve the Honeywell Service Agreement Addendum as presented?
Second.
Okay. Next item, consider approval of school improvement and transformation grant. I'll turn it over to
I will turn this over to Ms. Stevens, who has been helping us write this grant. That's one of her responsibilities, so.
So
Bless
this
you.
grant falls under Title I, School Improvement Grant, and the reason for the grant is the status of, the MRI grad status of New Hope High School. The monies are set aside for school improvement, staffing, those sorts of things specific to New Hope High School. Currently, for the 26-27 school year, we're looking at an award of $200,000. We are looking to use that funding for professional development for those teachers, as well as consideration for a night school credit recovery model. We sat down with Ms. Hutchins, Mr. Mapes, Dr. Parker, Ms. Q, and I, looking at dates. It looks like we're going to offer 2 6-week sessions where students could earn up to 3 credit hours using Edgenuity, accelerated, coming in, guided with teachers, and an administrator to oversee that. And so we're looking at using some of the funding for that purpose as well. The population of New Hope High School is unique in that they're trying to obtain credits rapidly, so it looks a little different than Lovington High School, and so we're hoping that the night school will offer that opportunity for those students most at risk.
So, up to 3 credit hours, we have 2 different systems.
3 and then 3 in the spring. They would go, so one session would go like from 5 to 6:30. Another session would go from 7 to 8:30, and then the potential for one on a third night, so that we would have the opportunity for them to do it. So, and it aligns with how long like an Edgenuity course takes to complete, the number of hours that a student would have to work through it. So we did all the mathing on that and came up with that kind of format. So.
Other questions for Stephanie? Oh, I'm sorry, Stephanie, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, Madam Secretary. We would compensate those teachers at our standard rate of additional hours. So just like we do summer school, just like we do tutoring, just that same rate for consistency. And there is a document that's uploaded for you and an assurance that will need to be signed, ensuring that we as an LEA and you as a board will adhere to the Title I expectations for using those funds and oversight of those funds. And those documents have to be uploaded before the grant can be approved, and we have until the end of the month.
So this is not considered a reorganization, correct?
Not at this point.
Okay,
Correct.
In the works of that.
okay.
This is a grant that we have to apply for,
Okay.
but we cannot move forward without your approval.
Okay.
So would it be considered supplemental then? Night classes is more supplemental to the daytime?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Instead of a reorganization, would it be more supplemental? Or supplementing
Adding
what
the night
the
class.
night classes?
Right, just providing more support for the school because of the status that they've been designated by the PED. So this is our last chance, this is our last hope.
Any other questions?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Hearing Hearing none, do I hear a motion to approve the school improvement, thank you, Stephanie, improvement and transformation grant as presented tonight?
So move.
I'll second.
Okay, the final item on our public portion of the meeting tonight is public comment time. At this time, is there anyone here to speak for public comment? Okay, hearing none. This will conclude at this time, the open portion of our meeting, and pursuant to Section 10-15-1 LMSD 1978, we will convene to executive session following a roll call. Do I hear a motion to move into executive session?
So move.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. All right, thank you, everyone. We're going to take a 5-minute recess.